Imagine waking up one morning to discover that the entrance to your property has been completely blocked off by a locked gate. No warning, no notice. Just a cold metal barrier with a sign that reads, "Property of Oakridge HOA." That's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago, but what they didn't know was that I had been planning for this for 5 years. That gate? It was just a trap, and they walked right into it one by one. Hey, where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious. Now, let me tell you the story of how a powerful HOA family tried to steal my property and ended up not only losing their reputation, but facing a barrage of lawsuits. I've always been a meticulous planner. It's part of what made me successful as a software engineer. Attention to detail, anticipating problems before they arise, and having contingency plans when they do. My colleagues used to joke that I could write code to solve problems that hadn't even happened yet. Those skills would prove invaluable when I found myself facing off against one of the most ruthless homeowners associations in San Diego County. My name is Alex Morgan. At 38, after years of living in cramped apartments and saving every penny, I finally had enough to purchase my dream property. 5 acres of undeveloped land on the outskirts of San Diego. It bordered the prestigious Oakridge community, a fact that would later become the source of all my troubles. My plan was simple but ambitious. Build an energy-efficient home with a workshop where I could tinker with my projects, away from the hustle and noise of city life. The property had everything I wanted: space, privacy, and most importantly, a breathtaking ocean view that made every sunset feel like a personal gift from nature. What I didn't realize when I bought the land was that this same ocean view had caught someone else's eye, long before I came along. Victoria Reynolds, the 57-year-old widow who presided over the Oakridge Homeowners Association with an iron fist, had been eyeing my property for years. A Boston native with old money and older prejudices, Victoria considered the exclusive nature of Oakridge to be its most valuable asset. The thought of someone like me, a single middle-class engineer, building whatever I wanted on adjacent land was apparently more than her sensibilities could bear. "Property values are the lifeblood of a community like ours," she once said at a community meeting I later watched on video. "We must protect them at all costs." What she really meant was that she would protect them at any cost, including breaking the law. Victoria wasn't working alone. Her loyal deputy was Harold Mitchell, a 62-year-old retired corporate attorney who followed her lead with the timidity of a man who had spent his career enabling stronger personalities. Though not inherently malicious, Harold's weakness made him dangerous, a man who would do the wrong thing if the right person asked him to. Jennifer Lee, the HOA secretary, and an ambitious 45-year-old real estate agent, rounded out their inner circle. Unlike Harold, Jennifer would eventually face a crisis of conscience when she realized just how far Victoria was willing to go. I first sensed trouble when I received an unexpected invitation to attend an Oakridge HOA meeting to discuss boundary issues. I declined politely, explaining that since I wasn't a resident of Oakridge, their HOA had no jurisdiction over my property. That's when the friendly approach ended. What followed was a series of escalating tactics designed to pressure me into selling my land at a fraction of its value. But Victoria had made a critical mistake. She didn't know who she was dealing with. She saw me as just another obstacle to remove, not realizing that my former career in building security systems had given me an intimate knowledge of defensive strategies and trap-setting techniques that would prove to be her undoing. As I dug through old property records one night, searching for information about the history of my land, I discovered something interesting. Victoria's approach was familiar. She had used similar tactics to force another landowner out years earlier. She preferred slow pressure and public humiliation to direct confrontation. The pattern was clear. Send violations for non-existent issues, delay permits, create problems with local officials, and finally, when the target was sufficiently worn down, make a lowball offer that seemed like sweet relief compared to the ongoing harassment. I wasn't going to play by her rules. I told myself that as I carefully organized the historical documents I'd found. But I was going to let her think I was. Somewhere in that stack of old land title documents, I found a small detail Victoria and her cronies had overlooked, a detail that wouldn't just save my property. It might shake the very foundation of their HOA empire. The harassment campaign began predictably enough. Every few days, I'd receive official-looking notices about violations that didn't exist. Excessive weed growth on land I hadn't even cleared yet. Construction debris when I hadn't begun building. Unauthorized structures that existed only in Victoria's imagination. Each notice came with a warning about fines and potential liens against my property. All completely baseless, of course, but intimidating to someone who didn't know better. Marco Sanchez, a local building inspector in his 50s, started showing up regularly for routine inspections. His hostility was barely concealed, and it didn't take long to confirm my suspicion that Victoria had him in her pocket. Every time I submitted paperwork for permits, mysterious issues would arise, delaying the process indefinitely. I kept detailed records of every interaction, every delay, every baseless citation, all while appearing increasingly frustrated and defeated. Victoria was playing her game, and I was letting her think she was winning. "Mr. Morgan," Marco said during one particularly tense visit, not bothering to hide his disdain, "I'm afraid there are several compliance issues with your preliminary plans. Nothing that can't be fixed, of course, but it's going to require substantial revisions and resubmission." He smiled without warmth. "These things take time. Lots of time." I nodded, playing the part of the discouraged property owner. "I understand. I'll get to work on those revisions right away." As soon as he left, I called Olivia Bennett, an old college friend who had become a successful real estate attorney. "Olivia, I think it's time we escalated our research," I told her, keeping my voice calm despite my growing determination. "I need to know everything about Victoria Reynolds, her associates, and especially any past legal issues with the Oakridge HOA. The situation came to a head at a community meeting where Victoria publicly accused me of planning to build an unsightly structure that would diminish property values throughout Oakridge. She even presented photoshopped images of an ugly, industrial-looking building, supposedly based on my plans. Plans that I had never shared with anyone, let alone the HOA. The crowning touch was her dramatic conclusion. "Mr. Morgan clearly has no regard for the aesthetic standards that make Oakridge special. We cannot allow one selfish individual to destroy what generations have built." The meeting erupted in concerned murmurs as Victoria stood smugly at the podium. What she didn't know was that Rachel, my journalist sister, was sitting quietly in the back row, recording everything. We left the meeting. Rachel squeezed my arm supportively. "She's digging her own grave, Alex. Every word of that was defamation." That night, after hours of additional research, I discovered Victoria's true motivation. The planned community pool expansion she had promised Oakridge residents to secure her re-election as HOA president required more land than they currently had. My property wasn't just convenient. It was necessary for her political survival within the community. But as I dug deeper, I found something even more disturbing. Victoria's interest in my land wasn't solely for the HOA's benefit. She had a personal stake that went back 15 years, a secret she had carefully guarded and that I now unwittingly held the key to exposing. George Coleman wasn't easy to find. The 70-year-old former city council member had deliberately kept a low profile since his retirement, but he was exactly the person I needed to talk to. As one of the original planners involved in developing the area, he knew the history of Oakridge and its surroundings better than anyone. More importantly, he had no love for Victoria Reynolds. "She's been pulling these kinds of stunts for years," George told me as we sat on his porch overlooking the city. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he pointed to various spots on the old maps we'd spread across the table. "But this time she's made a mistake. See this road here?" He pointed to a faded line that cut across one corner of my property. It's an old public access route that was never officially closed. The newer maps don't show it because it fell into disuse, but legally it's still a public right-of-way. Studied the line. "So, you're saying there's another way to access my land? One that doesn't go through Oakridge territory?" George nodded, a sly smile crossing his face. Exactly. And if someone were to restore that access route, there's not a damn thing Victoria or her HOA could do about it. This was the break I needed, a way to outmaneuver Victoria at her own game. But I wanted more than just access to my land. I wanted justice for what she'd put me through. With my background in building security systems, I began formulating a plan that would use Victoria's own tactics against her. First, I would create a decoy gate at what appeared to be the only entrance to my property, the one that bordered Oakridge. This would be Victoria's target, her chance to lock me out, just as she had done to others before. But while she focused on that front entrance, I would secretly clear and restore the forgotten public access road, creating a second entrance that only I knew about. The decoy gate would be equipped with hidden cameras and sensors, documenting every illegal move the HOA made. It was in essence a sophisticated honeypot for HOA overreach. This is risky, Alex, Olivia warned when I shared my plan with her. What if they escalate beyond just locking you out? What if they damage your property or try to physically prevent you from building? That's exactly what I'm counting on, I replied, showing her the security system I designed. Every action they take will be documented, from multiple angles. By the time this is over, we'll have enough evidence to bring them down for good. Meanwhile, my sister Rachel had been conducting her own investigation into Victoria's past dealings. What she discovered confirmed my suspicions. Victoria wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was a calculating manipulator with a history of using her position for personal gain. The pool expansion project she championed included a private agreement with a development company her late husband had worked for, a clear conflict of interest she had never disclosed to the other HOA members. Over the next few weeks, I put my plan into motion. During the day, I made visible attempts to access my property through the main entrance, always appearing frustrated when confronted by HOA representatives. At night, with the help of trusted contractors who understood the importance of discretion, I cleared the overgrown public access road and set up my security infrastructure. Cameras were carefully hidden in trees, rocks, and even inside the decorative elements of the decoy gate itself. Every inch of my property line was under surveillance. Every conversation within range would be recorded. Everything's ready, I told Olivia after the final camera was installed. Now we just need to wait for Victoria to make her move. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, as I approached the main entrance to my property, I found exactly what I had been expecting, a heavy-duty metal gate blocking the way, adorned with a freshly painted sign declaring it property of Oakridge HOA. The trap was set, and Victoria had taken the bait. What she didn't know was that while she thought she was locking me out, she was actually locking herself into a legal nightmare of her own making. I stood before the newly installed gate, making sure my reaction was captured by both my hidden cameras and the dash cam in my car. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, pulling at the heavy lock for good measure. Then I called the police, knowing full well they would do little more than file a report. But establishing an official record? That was part of the plan. Officer Williams arrived about 20 minutes later, looking bored and mildly irritated. "Property dispute," he muttered as he scribbled in his notebook. "This is a civil matter, Mr. Morgan. You'll need to take it up with the HOA or get a lawyer involved." "But they've illegally blocked access to my property," I protested, delivering the line with just the right amount of controlled outrage. "How can that not be trespassing or vandalism?" "Look, I understand you're upset," he said with a sigh. "But without clear proof of who installed the gate and whether they had the authority, there's not much we can do. I'll file the report, but I recommend you contact an attorney." He handed me a case number and left, just as I had predicted. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly Victoria would show up to gloat. Less than an hour after the police left, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up beside my truck. Victoria stepped out, followed by Harold, both dressed as if heading to a country club luncheon instead of standing at the edge of a crime scene. "Mr. Morgan," Victoria called out, her voice soaked in artificial concern. "Is there a problem?" I turned to face them, doing my best to conceal my satisfaction. They were falling into the trap perfectly. "Yes, there's a problem," I said coolly. Someone's illegally blocked access to my property. Would you happen to know anything about that? Victoria's smile was practiced and icy. This gate? It's on Oakridge HOA property. I'm afraid your land is now part of our community. Due to a recent boundary adjustment, we've been trying to reach you about signing our covenant agreements. Boundary adjustment? I scoffed. You can't just claim someone else's land. Harold stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable but trying to remain firm. Actually, according to our recent surveys and some newly discovered historical documents, this access road has always been part of Oakridge. We're simply securing our perimeter. So you're saying I can't access my own land unless I join your HOA? I asked, carefully making sure the audio recording was crisp. That's one way of looking at it, Victoria said smoothly, though I'd prefer to say we're inviting you to become part of our exclusive community. Of course, if you find our rules too restrictive, we'd be open to purchasing your property at a fair market value. Fair market value? I chuckled. Let me guess, you decide what's fair. Victoria handed me a sealed envelope. Our offer is inside. It's quite generous considering the circumstances. I suggest you review it carefully. Without access to your land, its value drops considerably. I accepted the envelope, already knowing it would contain a lowball offer, less than half the property's worth. And if I refuse, then I'm afraid you'll have a lovely piece of land you can never use or develop, Victoria said, her smile unfading. The choice is yours, Mr. Morgan. Once they left, faces brimming with smug self-assurance, I opened the envelope. As expected, the offer was insulting. I called Olivia immediately. They took the bait, I told her. Every word recorded, in high definition. Victoria clearly admitted to blocking access to pressure me into joining the HOA or selling cheap. That's textbook coercion, Olivia said, barely able to hide her excitement. How soon do you want to spring the trap? Not yet, I replied, watching Victoria's car disappear around the corner. I've agreed to meet with her tomorrow to discuss my options. Let's see how much rope she gives herself to hang with. What Victoria and Harold didn't know was that, even as we spoke, a professional surveying team was quietly verifying my property boundaries and documenting the existence of a forgotten public access road. And they had just uncovered something far more powerful than we'd expected. Something that could completely turn the tables. The meeting with Victoria was scheduled for 2:03 p.m. at the Oakridge Clubhouse, a location clearly chosen to intimidate me with its grandeur. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in what I hoped passed for the attire of a defeated man on the verge of surrender. Naturally, Victoria kept me waiting. A petty power play. She eventually swept into the room at 2:20. Accompanied by Harold and a man I didn't recognize. She didn't bother with an apology. Mr. Morgan, thank you for being reasonable, she began, gesturing for me to sit across from her at the oversized oak table. This is Brian Cooper, our head of security. He'll be implementing whatever arrangements we settle on today. Brian, a thick-set man in his late 40s with sharp, observant eyes, nodded curtly. I took note of him for the legal records, knowing he'd likely be named in future proceedings. I've reviewed your offer, I said, deliberately hesitant. It's significantly below what I paid for the land. Victoria's smile was all business. The real estate market fluctuates, Mr. Morgan, and property without access obviously commands a lower price. I assure you, given the circumstances, our offer is more than generous. For the next hour, I played my role. Perfectly resigned, reluctant, teetering on the edge of acceptance. Victoria countered every weak objection I raised with practiced polish. Harold remained mostly silent, visibly uncomfortable every time Victoria's words edged into legal gray zones. Brian loomed near the door, arms folded, playing the intimidating enforcer. I need time to think about this, I said finally, rubbing my temples. It's a lot to process. Of course, Victoria said, clearly thinking she had me cornered. Take the weekend, but I should warn you, this offer expires on Monday. After that, your options will be far more limited. As I walked out of the clubhouse, I made a show of slumping my shoulders like a man broken by circumstances. What Victoria didn't know was that the entire meeting had been recorded by the discreet device hidden in my watch. Every threat, every veiled ultimatum captured in crystal clarity. More importantly, she had no idea I was about to return to my land using the newly restored public access road, one her security team didn't even know existed. The road was narrow, rough, and choked, with foliage, but we had cleared enough of it to make it usable again. It wound through a wooded area before emerging near the rear of my property. I'd spent hours hacking through vines and brush myself, but every scratch and blister had been worth it. As I parked in the clearing where my equipment was stored, I smiled. Victoria had no idea I'd been accessing the land all along. Over the following week, I accelerated my preparations. Using the secret entrance, I transported construction materials and equipment onto the site. A small, loyal crew, handpicked for discretion and handsomely paid, began laying the foundation for my house. Meanwhile, Victoria intensified her pressure campaign, completely unaware that her every move was being monitored. The HOA hired a private security firm to patrol the front gate, still assuming it was the only access point. These guards were instructed to stop me if I attempted to enter, a clear case of false imprisonment. Victoria even filed falsified documents with the county, claiming partial ownership based on some long-debunked historical precedent. Jennifer Lee, who had silently watched these schemes unfold, began quietly collecting her own record of Victoria's escalating misconduct. Then came the moment Victoria pushed too far. Frustrated by my disappearance, she instructed her security team to inspect my property for violations. In reality, it was blatant trespassing. Surveillance footage captured everything. Brian Cooper and two men cutting the very lock they'd installed, stepping onto my land with cameras and markers in hand. They spent nearly 2 hours photographing and marking spots around the property, all illegal actions that would later form the backbone of my case. But the real shock came when they found the half-finished foundation. Brian immediately called Victoria. My cameras picked up his voice clearly. "Mrs. Reynolds, we have a situation someone's been building on the Morgan property. I don't know how they're getting in, but there's fresh construction here." Whatever Victoria said in response, Brian's reaction was instant. His face hardened. Then he ordered his men to damage the equipment I'd left behind. Another criminal act, again recorded in perfect detail. That evening, Detective David Torres called me. A no-nonsense officer with a reputation for honesty, Torres had been assigned to my case. "Mr. Morgan, I've reviewed your submissions," he said. "This is no longer a civil matter. We're looking at vandalism, falsified documents, and possibly criminal conspiracy. We need to talk." Meanwhile, Jennifer Lee had finally had enough. She contacted me via an anonymous email. "I can't be part of this anymore. I have copies of everything. When you're ready to move, let me know." The pieces were locking into place. Victoria believed she was squeezing me into submission, but she was actually walking straight into a legal snare of her own making. And she still didn't know about my access road, or that I had been building on the land the entire time. Theo. Time had come to spring the trap. The look on Victoria's face when she saw me standing on my property with a full crew behind me was worth every dime I had spent. Her black Mercedes screeched to a stop in front of the gate. She jumped out, hair disheveled and face contorted, in disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "How did you get in there? Brian!" she screamed into her phone. "Get security here now." I approached the fence calmly, remaining well within my property line. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds. Beautiful day to start building a house, isn't it?" Harold's car rolled up behind hers, and he got out slowly, pale and silent. Unlike Victoria, he immediately understood what this meant. "Victoria," he said softly, tugging at her sleeve. "Let's discuss this privately," Victoria said, grabbing my sleeve. "There's nothing to discuss," she snapped, yanking her arm away. "He's trespassing." On his own land. That's impossible. I couldn't help but smile. Not impossible at all, when you know the history of this area. While she was busy installing her illegal gate on what she assumed was the only entrance to my property, I had been quietly restoring the original public access road on the eastern boundary, the one clearly marked on the county's 1952 surveys. I held up a laminated copy of that survey. Harold's expression shifted from concern to outright fear. Victoria snatched the document from my hand, her eyes scanning the page. The public right-of-way was marked in bold ink, cutting across the corner of my property. "This is a forgery," she hissed, though her trembling voice betrayed uncertainty. "The county clerk's office would disagree," I said calmly, "as would the state transportation department. It's still listed as an unmaintained public road, never officially closed, just forgotten. Until now." Brian Cooper arrived with 2 security guards, all of them looking confused by the scene unfolding. Victoria thrust the document into Brian's hands. "Remove these people immediately. They're trespassing on HOA property." Brian looked at the survey, then back at the 2 of us, his confidence wavering. "Mrs. Reynolds, if this is accurate, we don't have the authority." "Do your job." Victoria's composure was unraveling fast, her face flushed with rage. Raised my voice, projecting clearly for the hidden cameras. "Just to be clear, we're recording all of this. Any attempt to interfere with my construction crew will be treated as criminal trespass, possibly even assault. I've already discussed the vandalism to my equipment with Detective Torres. I doubt you want more charges added." Harold finally spoke up, his voice steady but strained. "Victoria, stop." He turned to me, adopting a lawyer's tone despite the sweat on his brow. "Mr. Morgan, I'm sure we can resolve this misunderstanding without escalation. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting with our attorneys to—" "No more meetings," I interrupted. "No more negotiations. Your HOA illegally blocked access to my property, filed fraudulent documents claiming ownership of my land, vandalized my equipment, and tried to coerce me into selling for a fraction of its market value. I'm building on my land, using a legal access road your HOA president conveniently ignored in her obsession with expanding her little kingdom." Realizing she was losing control, Victoria made a critical mistake. "Brian," she ordered, her voice cold and cutting, "shut down that construction now. I don't care how you do it." Brian hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Reynolds, I can't legally—" "I'm not paying you to tell me what you can't do," she exploded, loud enough for every hidden mic and witness to hear. "Either handle the situation or find another job." That was all I needed. Victoria had just explicitly ordered a criminal act, on camera and in front of multiple witnesses. Brian shook his head and took a step back. "Sorry, Mrs. Reynolds. My company provides security, not criminal services. We're done here." He motioned to his guards and they retreated to their vehicle, leaving Victoria exposed and without backup. Harold stepped in front of her, placing himself between her and the construction crew. "We're leaving," he said firmly. "Before you say anything else that ends up in a deposition." He practically dragged her toward their car, whispering urgently as she resisted. As they drove off, I caught Harold glancing back at me through the passenger window, not with anger, but with a dawning comprehension. They had walked into a trap, and now they were caught. The next morning, Victoria and Harold were served with legal papers. The lawsuit named the Oakridge HOA, Victoria Reynolds, Harold Mitchell, and Brian Cooper's security firm as defendants. Charges included trespassing, vandalism, fraud, harassment, and conspiracy. Attached to the complaint were dozens of pages of evidence, photographs, video footage, falsified documents, and sworn witness statements, including one from Jennifer Lee. Her insider testimony would be devastating. That afternoon, a news van pulled up outside the Oakridge gates. The headline they were about to break would send shockwaves through the entire community. Prestigious HOA accused of criminal conspiracy to seize neighbors' land. Victoria's carefully constructed image and Oakridge's reputation was about to implode. 2 days later, Jennifer Lee called me. Her voice had changed. Once confident and assertive, she now sounded nervous, but resolute. "Alex," she whispered, "I found something big, and I think I know why Victoria hates you so much." We met in a downtown coffee shop far from Oakridge's watchful eyes. Jennifer wore sunglasses and a hat, glancing over her shoulder as she slid into the booth. "I'm risking everything," she said, voice low. Victoria has powerful friends. I'll protect your identity as best I can, I said. But I need to know what you found. She slid a folder across the table. These are internal HOA communications and emails between Victoria and Clearwater Development, the company her late husband worked for. They're planning a luxury resort. Your land is the linchpin. It's the only parcel with direct access to both the main road and the coastline. Without it, the whole project collapses. I flipped through the documents, architectural plans, investment projections, marketing materials. It was massive. Why not just make me an offer before I bought it, I asked. This looks like a multi-million-dollar deal. Jennifer pointed to a date on one of the documents. Because it's personal. That land used to belong to Victoria's husband's family. They sold it during a financial crisis 15 years ago. He always planned to buy it back, but he died before he could. Victoria promised him on his deathbed that she'd reclaim it and build something to honor him. So when I bought it, you unknowingly stepped into a personal vendetta, she said. Victoria sees you as the one obstacle keeping her from fulfilling that promise. But make no mistake, this isn't just emotional. She stands to make millions. The HOA pool story? Just a cover to get the board on her side. I leaned back, absorbing it all. This explains everything. She isn't just fighting to preserve property values. She's obsessed. Obsessed. And greedy, Jennifer corrected. If this resort goes through, she's set to earn over $2 million in consulting fees, plus a cut of the resort's profits. This isn't about her husband anymore. It's about power and money. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Olivia, just filed for emergency injunction. Claims your access road is unsafe. Hearing tomorrow 9 a.m. Be ready. Victoria had made her next move, using the courts to stall me. If construction finished before the lawsuit resolved, her entire plan would collapse. She couldn't allow that. But neither of us anticipated what would happen next. The following morning, Olivia and I arrived at the courthouse. As we approached the steps, a tall, well-dressed man in his 30s stopped us. Mr. Morgan, I'm Thomas Reynolds, Victoria's son. We need to talk. He looked tired, conflicted. I flew in from Boston, he said. A friend saw the news story. I had no idea my mother was doing all this. We sat in the quiet corner of the courthouse lobby. My father always regretted losing that land, Thomas admitted. But this isn't what he would have wanted. She says she's protecting his legacy, but I've seen the Clearwater documents. This is about greed. What does she say when you confront her? Olivia asked. She shuts down, says I don't understand. But I do. She's chasing control. It's not about memory. It's about manipulation. Before we could continue, the bailiff called our case. Inside the courtroom, Victoria's attorney argued that the access road posed environmental and safety risks and demanded construction. Halt until a lengthy review could be completed. Olivia stepped up with grace and clarity. She presented full permits, engineering reports, and recent inspections verifying the road was safe and compliant. The truth was out. But the war was far from over. Compliant with all safety regulations, the judge, an older woman with a reputation for no-nonsense decision-making, didn't take long to make her ruling. The request for emergency injunction is denied, she declared, giving Victoria's attorney a stern look. Furthermore, the court is concerned about the pattern of interference described in Mr. Morgan's affidavit. The defendants are hereby ordered to refrain from any further action that might impede access to or construction on the plaintiff's property, while this matter proceeds to trial. As we left the courtroom, Thomas approached Victoria in the hallway. Though I couldn't hear their conversation, the body language told the story. Thomas confronting, Victoria defensive, then both of them moving to a more private area for what appeared to be an intensely heated discussion. That's a twist I didn't see coming. Huh, Olivia murmured as we watched them disappear around a corner. Having her son turn against her might be the one thing Victoria wasn't prepared for. Later that day, Jennifer called with the latest development. Victoria had a complete meltdown at the emergency HOA board meeting. Thomas had shown up and publicly questioned her about the Clearwater deal. She actually confessed everything: the false documents, the vandalism orders, the illegal gate. Claimed it was all justified to protect Edward's legacy. The board was in chaos. Half of them were talking about resignation to avoid liability. The trap had sprung completely now, capturing not just Victoria, but exposing the corruption that had festered within the Oakridge HOA for years. With the injunction denied, my construction could proceed unimpeded. With Jennifer's documents and Thomas's cooperation, the lawsuit was almost certainly going to succeed. And with Victoria's public confession, criminal charges were now a very real possibility. I had all I needed to not only win this battle decisively, but to potentially see Victoria face serious legal consequences for her actions. The question now was whether victory alone would be enough, or if there might be a more satisfying and perhaps more just resolution to this conflict. "Mr. Morgan, thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I know you have every right to press forward with both the lawsuit and criminal charges. What my mother did was inexcusable." I sat down, studying Thomas's face for any resemblance to Victoria's calculating demeanor, but found only genuine concern and something that looked surprisingly like shame. "I'm curious why you wanted this meeting, Thomas. Your mother made her position quite clear." "That's precisely why I'm here," Thomas replied, opening a leather portfolio on the table. "My father wasn't the man my mother portrays him as. Yes, he regretted losing that land, but not because of some sentimental attachment. He was a businessman who saw its potential value. He slid several old documents across to me. These are his personal journals and letters from that period. He never asked my mother to reclaim anything. That's a narrative she created to justify her obsession. I carefully examined the papers, finding Edward Reynolds's handwriting describing business setbacks and a philosophical acceptance of losses, with no mention of a deathbed promise or lingering attachment to the property I now owned. So the promise she claims to be fulfilling, a fiction, Thomas confirmed, his voice tinged with sadness. My father would be horrified by what she's done in his name. He was tough in business, but he was ethical. He believed in fair competition and respect for the law. Victoria arrived precisely on time, her usual imperious entrance somewhat diminished by recent events. She froze momentarily upon seeing her son, then composed herself and took the remaining seat. Harold Mitchell followed, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days, and Jennifer Lee slipped in quietly behind them, taking a chair slightly apart from the others. Olivia, who had been reviewing documents in the corner, moved to sit beside me as Victoria cleared her throat. I agreed to this meeting because Thomas believes there might be a resolution that avoids further unpleasantness, though I maintain that my actions were justified in principle, if perhaps overzealous in execution. I couldn't help but smile at her persistent refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing. "Mrs. Reynolds, let's be clear about where things stand. I have documented evidence of trespassing, vandalism, filing fraudulent documents, and conspiracy to deprive me of my property rights. The district attorney is reviewing whether to bring criminal charges, and my civil lawsuit names not just you personally, but the entire HOA board. Your insurance won't cover intentional wrongdoing, which means you're facing potential personal, financial ruin. Is that an accurate summary?" Harold winced visibly, while Victoria's face remained stoic, though a muscle twitched near her eye. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Morgan? To destroy Oakridge? To see me in prison? Will that satisfy your need for revenge?" "I don't want revenge, Mrs. Reynolds. I never did. I wanted what I've always wanted, to build my home and live in peace. Everything that's happened since has been a direct result of your actions, not mine." Thomas leaned forward, his gaze shifting between his mother and me. "I've spent the past week reviewing everything. The legitimate documents and the fraudulent ones, the surveillance footage, the witness statements. There's no question that what was done was illegal and wrong." He turned to Victoria. "Mother, you need to accept reality. This isn't going away." Victoria's composure finally cracked, her voice rising sharply. "That land was supposed to be our legacy. Your father..." Never asked you to do any of this, Thomas interrupted firmly. I've read his journals. This crusade is yours alone. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of misplaced devotion and calculated ambition. Victoria stared at her son, her expression shifting from anger to something that might have been grief in someone capable of genuine self-reflection. I've spoken with the Clearwater development executives, Thomas continued, now addressing me. They're willing to make you a legitimate offer for the property, fair market value plus a substantial premium, all above board and properly documented. No pressure tactics, no threats, just business. I considered this for a moment. And if I'm not interested in selling, then they'll respect that decision and look elsewhere for development opportunities, Thomas replied without hesitation. But I thought you should at least have the option of hearing a legitimate offer before making your final decision. It was an interesting proposition. The truth was, while I had been fully committed to building my dream home on that land, the past few months had soured the experience considerably. Every view would remind me of this conflict. Every sunset, tainted by the memory of Victoria's schemes. I'm willing to hear the offer, I said finally. But there are other matters that need resolution, regardless of whether I sell or not. Olivia nodded and took over the conversation, laying out our terms. A public apology from Victoria and the HOA board, full reimbursement for all my expenses, including legal fees, immediate removal of the illegal gate, and Victoria's resignation from the HOA board. In exchange, I would drop the civil lawsuit and agree not to pursue criminal charges. Harold immediately recognized this as the lifeline it was. Speaking for the board, I believe these terms are reasonable and acceptable. Victoria started to object, but Thomas placed a firm hand on her arm. Mother, enough. You've done enough damage. This ends today. The discussion continued for another hour, ironing out details and specific language for the settlement agreement. Throughout it all, I observed Victoria's gradual deflation as she realized how completely her schemes had backfired. The woman, who had sought to intimidate me into submission, was now submitting to terms dictated by the very person she had targeted. 3 days later, we reconvened at the law offices that represented the HOA. The Clearwater development executives presented their offer, nearly triple what I had paid for the property. It was more than enough to purchase an even larger parcel of land farther up the coast, one with an even better view, and none of the negative associations of the current property. After careful consideration and lengthy discussions with Olivia, I accepted their offer. Victoria signed the settlement agreement, her hand remarkably steady despite the humiliation of her position. The document included not only my terms, but also provisions that would restructure the Oakridge HOA to prevent similar abuses of power in the future, a legacy very different from the one Victoria had envisioned. As the meeting concluded, Jennifer approached me quietly. I've resigned from the board, she confided. I'm starting my own real estate company, one that actually values ethics. I wanted to thank you. This whole situation has been a wake-up call for many of us. Sometimes it takes a shock to see what we've been enabling, I replied, genuinely wishing her well in her new venture. Thomas was the last to speak with me before I left. I know this isn't how you planned things, he said, but I hope the outcome is satisfactory nonetheless. It's different, I acknowledged, but sometimes adaptability is more important than rigid adherence to a plan. I learned that designing security systems, the best protection isn't always about building impenetrable walls, but about creating flexible responses to threats outside the building. I took a moment to look back at the Oakridge community in the distance. Their elegant gate gleamed in the afternoon sun, no longer a symbol of exclusivity that intimidated me, but merely an ornate entrance to a neighborhood like any other. Sometimes the best victory isn't defeating your enemy, but transforming the battlefield entirely. Victoria had set a trap for me, never realizing that she was walking into one herself. And in that unexpected symmetry lay a lesson worth far more than any piece of land, no matter how beautiful the view.